Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I feel the need to do this in regards to a recent comic book that's just come out. Superior Spider-Man number 9. Oh boy, we got a bad one. This, my friends, is Dan Slott. He's the current writer on Spider-Man, specifically the Superior Spider-Man series. He's the guy I'll be directing all my ire towards. But before I can begin talking about the issue, I have to provide some context. So it's time for comic book history you don't care about but need to know in order to understand this. With apologies to Linkara from atop the fourth wall. Please don't sue me. Now, in the previous Spider-Man stories, Dr. Octopus had attempted to, you guessed it, destroy the world. How? By frying everybody with global satellites. Pretty bad. If not for the heroic efforts of Spider-Man and his friends, Dr. Octopus would have committed global genocide. Now, how does this relate to the story? Well, besides the fact that he was being a total genocidal freak, the good doctor manages to take control of Peter Parker's body and put Peter Parker's mind into his old, decaying, dying body at the same time. And to cover up what he's done, he beats up Spider-Man's enemies, attacks Peter's friends, and then, well, Dr. Octopus kind of wins. Yeah, seriously, I'm not kidding. Dr. Octopus succeeds. Peter Parker loses his life. Dr. Octopus is now in Peter Parker's body. He is running around as the Superior Spider-Man. And it's not... How am I going to put this? I know the importance of changing things up. I know that the status quo can get stagnant. I understand that the biggest frustration people really have with comic books is that not enough changes, or if things do change, that they don't stick. I, too, have been frustrated by that. I understand. I do. But the problem is that when you take a risk like this, you can go too far. And it wasn't just enough to make this a villain gets redeemed story. Oh no! Dan Slott went farther. As in, put a bullet in a villain's head type of farther. As in, completely eviscerate somebody for making fun of him farther. Are you beginning to see why I dislike this run of Spider-Man so much? Now, the good news is that a ghost of Peter Parker has been living in Doc Ock's head, and he's been struggling to regain his body back. And in Superior Spider-Man number 9, it almost looks like he's gonna succeed. Unfortunately, almost only counts in horseshoes. Things go south. Quick. Peter, of course, screams in frustration at the doctor that he's ruined his reputation. Nobody trusts Spider-Man to do the right thing anymore. He's a murderer. The doc suggests, however, that in sticking to rigid, goody-two-shoes morality, Peter didn't do enough to stop crime. This is all I can do. This is all I can do. Screw you, Dan Slott. Here's the part where I really get pissed off. Doc Ock accuses Peter of going too easy on crooks like the Vulture. In fact, because he let the Vulture get away, the guy came back using young boys as his foot soldiers. Children to do crime. Here's the problem. That is not Peter's fault. Being a villain does not absolve you of responsibility. That's the Vulture's fault, not Peter's. Why are you blaming him? Dr. Octopus then blames Peter for what the villain Massacre did, because the guy killed 30 people when he got out of prison, and Peter could have stopped that if he'd put the guy down for good. Again, it is not a hero's fault when a villain chooses to do bad things. Take responsibility. Oh, but here's the part where we really heat the zenith of mischaracterization. The one in which Dr. Octopus yells at Peter for almost making a young girl die when Dr. Octopus was trying to save her with an operation. And Peter interfered. Would you like to know why that girl was sick? Why Dr. Octopus had to operate at all? I'll tell you. It had to do with him trying to turn the world into a flaming, burning wreck. She wouldn't have been in the hospital if he hadn't pulled off that cook the planet scheme. The only reason she was in danger in the first place was because of the good doctor. But no! Dan Slott feels the need to make Peter Parker look bad to make Dr. Octopus look good. Listen, you jackass, I'm not going to let the supervillain that tried to cook the entire world take the moral high ground in this. Dan Slott has gone to write something that goes beyond offensive into something that is just vile. This is morally reprehensible. Go to hell, Dan Slott. I'm ashamed of you. Maybe you think perhaps I'm being unfair. After all, didn't Dan Slott address this very point in an interview and say that Peter Parker isn't exactly a saint? Didn't he say that Peter Parker was the guy from Amazing Fantasy number 15 who was going to use his powers to benefit himself and his family and screw the rest of the world? Yes, he was that person. And that was over 50 years ago. People expect more. They deserve more. Peter Parker is not that selfish, whiny teenager that he used to be. He's not the kind of person who would let Flash Thompson get in trouble with Doctor Doom just because Flash has been bullying him recently in high school. The most recent example that Dan Slott brings up of Peter Parker doing something selfish is when Peter takes a gold notebook home. And that was from the 1980s. The 80s! I understand wanting to do the Spider-Man books from a new perspective. I understand wanting to tell a story of a villain trying to get some kind of redemption, trying to get a new life. But this is the way Dan Slott did this was so completely out of character and reprehensible, I can't stomach it. He has made, as I said, Spider-Man being willing to let a little girl die so that Dr. Octopus can look like a saint in comparison. I don't care if Peter Parker is in a uniquely desperate position. He would never do that. Peter is not nearly as self-absorbed as Dan Slott seems to think that he is. And worst of all, I can't even believe I'm saying this, but guess what Slott said? And here's what Dan Slott said. Do you want a hero who's more heroic, or do you want a hero who gets more heroic things done? Would you rather have the man or the results? And judging by what was written, Dan Slott seems to think that the ends justify the means. No! We already went through this with Spider-Man. There was a whole period back in the 90s where Peter Parker utterly lost himself in the Spider-Man persona and completely ignored the human part of him when he called himself the Spider. You know, in the early days of when the Clone Saga began and Ben Reilly was coming back. And those were times that drove readers away in droves. In droves. Or, you know what, let's try to take this to a different level. Let's take someone like Venom. He's an anti-hero. You might say, yeah, he gets results, but he's kind of a contrast to Peter, who's more heroic, but doesn't always get the kind of results you might like. But we're still going to side with Peter over Venom, because Venom is a psychopath. I mean, yeah, Eddie Brock tries to do the right thing, and he might have good reasons for doing what he does, But he's still a sociopath. He's still bonkers. At least, well, he was, but then he supposedly got better, and then they made him psychopathic again. The point is that all Dan Slott is doing is repeating a trend that Peter should be past. We're all dead tired of kill the enemy, gritty, grim, dark, 90s anti-hero types who walk the line between vigilante and being an actual superhero. We're tired of seeing that kind of hero. That's not who Spider-Man is supposed to be. And Dan Slott should understand this. When he first began writing, after Spider Island, I thought we'd actually see development, because Peter took on a sidekick of his own, whom he was trying to teach to be responsible. Someone who within he saw a reflection of himself. The town respected him. They trusted him more. They actually felt like he was a really decent person. Jameson was the mayor. His Aunt May had a relationship. It looked like there was actual change going on. He'd even broken up with Carly. And for a while, I actually thought they were really going to start developing the character more and having him move past this idea of, past these trends that they'd already worked to death. But evidently not. As such, I have something to say. This comic sucks. It deserves to burn, and it's going to. This is a job for Spider-Man, but since he's clearly not here, I'm gonna have to do this myself. Come along, kids! I'm not gonna pretend that every single Spider-Man story is perfect, or that Peter Parker's a perfect character, but I can't forgive what Dan Slott's done. This comic deserves to burn, and it's going to. Now, if I can just get this lighter to work. That's it. Come on. This could be tricky. I have stuck newspaper in between this comic. It will burn now. Or maybe it won't. Crap! Come on. There we go. Burn, baby. Burn. In fact, you know what? Let's get some lighter fluid up in this bitch. Aw, crap, it went out. Fully. I have dosed this thing with lighter fluid. It will burn now. Holy shit, this thing won't die! Look at it! Maybe it is the superior Spider-Man. No, I'm not giving up on this. I've dumped this thing into a can. It will burn now. Burn, baby. Burn. 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 I do love my job. I really do.